right, we are live with Alexander Mercouris, and we have with us the excellent Professor Jeffrey Sachs. Gentlemen, we have about 30 minutes. We have a lot to discuss. So a quick hello to everybody that is watching us. Alexander, Professor Sachs, let's jump into it. By the way, I have all of Professor Sachs's information where you can follow him and his work in the description box down below, and I will add it in the comment as well. Alexander, Professor Sachs, let's talk about what is going on in Syria.
Let's go straight in, because obviously we've had dramatic events in Syria, a collapse of the Assad government just after just a few weeks. Assad is now in Moscow. Lots of news coming from Syria itself. Professor Sachs, let's go straight in, since I know you have very time limited today. Thank you, by the way, for joining us.
Great to be with you as always.
Tell me, tell us your views, and then we can take it from there. Your overall views.
I think the interesting starting point is a statement by Netanyahu a couple of days ago. He gave a press conference. He said that this is a completion of a step-by-step process that Israel has been pursuing. And I think that is not bragging, if I could put it in that odd way. I think that is an accurate statement of what has happened. But it's not only an Israeli effort of the last few months with its war on Hamas and Hezbollah, which dramatically weakened the military base of the Assad government, which depended on Hezbollah for its military backing. But this is a campaign of Israel, as Netanyahu himself said, that is to remake the Middle East, that goes back 30 years, actually. Now, let me state at the outset, I think Netanyahu is a madman. I think what Israel has done is destructive beyond belief. But the point is that there has been a plan. The plan has been to remake the Middle East in Israel's image, if you will. And already back in 1996, in a neocon paper written for the new Israeli prime minister at the time, Benjamin Netanyahu, called Clean Break, this was described. The clean break was a clean break of the Middle East, that Israel, of course, meaning the United States, military backing Israel, would take out Israel's enemies. And this has been an operational plan, strangely enough, at least since 9/11. We have a remarkable statement by General Wesley Clark that is very well known, that after the 9/11 attack, Wesley Clark visited the Pentagon and he was shown a piece of paper that said 7 countries would be overthrown in 5 years. And the list was Iraq, Syria, Iran, Lebanon, Somalia, Sudan, and Libya. And Clark expressed befuddlement and bewilderment. What does this have to do with 9/11? And the answer was, we're making the Middle East over again. This was the clean break strategy from 1996, now to be implemented. And in September 2001, though Iraq had nothing to do with 9/11, the decision was made immediately that to implement this remake of the Middle East, the first invasion would be of Iraq. This by itself is interesting, just as a footnote. The reason that they chose Iraq first was not because of Saddam or weapons of mass destruction, which they knew did not exist, but rather there was a legal fiction that they could use, a 1998 Iraq Liberation Act, which had been passed by Congress and signed by President Clinton, that made it the law of the land that Saddam Hussein should be removed from power. So they thought legally, literally, I mean, you do something completely lawless, initiating war, but you look for a legal fig leaf. And that was why Iraq first. But the idea was that Syria would be overthrown immediately afterwards. And then immediately after that would be the rest of the list. And what has been explained to me by military individuals that were in the midst of this is that the US military got tied down in Iraq in an unexpected way with the insurgency. So they didn't move straight to take out Assad, which was supposed to happen in 2003. So this is quite interesting. What we're seeing in the last days is part of a plan that goes back more than 20 years. It sounds zany, but this is craziness that we're dealing with. This is a plan for taking out 7 regimes. And maybe I'll step back and then I'll take a pause and turn it back over to you, Alexander. But why do this? And Netanyahu spelled this out in his book in 1996, Fighting Terrorism, and then in a rather remarkable speech that he gave in the United States on September 20th, 2001, just after 9/11. He said, you don't fight terrorists by fighting the terrorists. You fight terrorists by fighting the states that support them. So Hamas and Hezbollah are backed by Saddam Hussein. They're backed by Assad. They're backed by Iran. In fact, it wasn't just the Iranian axis of resistance back then. It was all of these states around Israel that were supporting the Palestinian cause. And Netanyahu's idea, backed by the crazy, violent, repulsive neocons, I hope I'm being clear, in the US government, said, yes, we will remake the Middle East by war, one after another. And if you think about it, of course, Iraq was 2003. The war on Assad started in 2011. Not everyone is aware of Operation Timber Sycamore, but this is the CIA operation to overthrow Assad under Obama. And everyone should understand, doesn't matter, Democrats, Republicans, nice people, not nice people. America has one foreign policy of continuity, and it has nothing to do with Democrats and Republicans. So Assad was 2011, the war started, but they didn't succeed in overthrowing Assad because he had backing from Russia, which started especially in 2015. Then if you go down the rest of the list, Somalia, well, that was attacked by a U.S. proxy by Ethiopia in 2006. Sudan, the United States broke Sudan into pieces. It literally dividing it into Sudan and South Sudan with the clever ploy of the United States to put all the oil reserves in South Sudan, not in North Sudan, which is now bankrupt and in starvation and in civil war. Libya in 2011. Lebanon, of course, invaded repeatedly by Israel, including just recently. So actually, this vision has been carried out. And this is what Netanyahu was crowing about a couple of days. We have remade the Middle East. We've done it step by step. So we should have no doubt that this is part of a long-term strategy. Of course, there are cameo appearances by Erdogan. He wants Turkish influence in Syria. This definitely plays a role. I don't mean to minimize that. But this is part of a long-standing plan. And the immediate collapse, which none of us saw coming. I don't know anyone that saw this except, I suppose, inside the Israeli intelligence community and no doubt CIA and a few others. Hezbollah was the backstop of the Syrian regime. And the idea was, of course, by attacking Hezbollah in Lebanon and drawing Hezbollah forces into Lebanon and blocking the resupply of Hezbollah through the active bombing of Syria in recent weeks and through this military action. This was the way to bring down the regime. It happened, I'm sure, much faster than anybody anticipated. Now Israel is invading Syria from the southwest into the northeast. Where it stops, who knows? There are crazy people in Israel who say go on to Damascus.
Well, what they're going to do, it seems to me, is that they're going to create chaos all around themselves. Chaos is a very, very difficult thing to control. They're also going to find that they are ultimately controlling more Arab territory with more Arabs who don't want to be controlled by them. One would have thought that that's going to make their long-term problems much, much worse. I would have thought that what you've described, which I'm absolutely sure you're correct, by the way. I mean, it's one only has to listen to Netanyahu and other Israeli officials to see that this is correct. But what this is doing is sowing the storm and preparing the whirlwind, because sooner or later, if you are surrounded by a chaotic, unstable Middle East all around you, you're going to be affected by that yourself. And if we talk about, destroying and destabilizing states, the Palestinian Authority was something like a state, and it was undermined, and the result was Hamas. And Hamas is the force that Israel now has to fight in Gaza. Gaza is a small territory, very contained. The Israelis are all around it. They can, to some extent, control the scope of the war there, but trying to do the same in a place like Syria, trying to do the same right across the entire Middle East, it seems to me that that is an absolute nightmare. They should have been seeking peace with these countries, not trying to undermine and destroy them.
If you look at the killing fields and the chaos that Israel and the United States have sown throughout the Middle East since the Iraq War, it's stunning that there has not been one moment of political solution, not one moment of peace, not one resolution of one crisis. So, to my mind, this whole approach is madness. And if you were to have read Netanyahu or known Netanyahu back 30 years, it was madness then, and it's madness today. But what you're saying is not good speculation about the future. It is the historical record. What has happened to every intervention? There is ongoing, nonstop war and division. This is true, of course, in Iraq. It's true, obviously, in Lebanon. It is true, obviously, in Syria, where this country has been completely dismantled, broken in every way. It was a functioning middle-income country with normal development prospects before 2011, before the deliberate attempt to destroy it. What has happened in Libya since Gaddafi was brought down? Did that bring peace and democracy, as these fools in my government pretend it will? No, of course not. It has brought nonstop civil war. Somalia, it doesn't exist as a functioning country to this day. Sudan, absolutely astounding. There are millions of people on the brink of starvation. There is a war inside Sudan, a civil war, and there's a civil war in South Sudan. In other words, what has happened from this 7 wars in 5 years strategy of Netanyahu and the Israel lobby and the neoconservatives in the United States? Yes, they've remade the Middle East into a catastrophe, into an ongoing, fulminant war zone. and Netanyahu's most fervent hope till this day is war with Iran. And of course, it's not an irony, it's the tragedy of all of this. Iran has been indicating to this miserable Biden administration, I can't wait to see it go, for 2 years, peace offerings saying we want to negotiate, we want to find a diplomatic resolution. I spoke with another intermediary yesterday who asked not to be identified, who was involved in high-level discussions where Iran was trying to reach out to find a diplomatic approach to the Biden administration. In the interpretation of the people running Israel and the United States, if the other side says negotiate, that means they are weak, and you should start by assassinating literally the negotiators, because it's very important to kill people who would negotiate in the Netanyahu neocon vision, and then you go to war against them. They're weak. This is the madness that we're in right now. What will come out of this? Nothing good. Absolutely nothing good. The idea that the jihadist groups that the United States has backed, and of course everybody does understand, I'm sure, listening in, that Al-Qaeda is a U.S. creation, was and always has been and continues to be. So all these, quote, terrorist groups, yes, they're on CIA backing from the start. It's not even, of course, not even a secret. It's thoroughly documented in shelffuls of books. You don't get peace out of this. You don't get a safe border because we've brought down the evil Assad regime. You get ongoing war and chaos, and that's already what is starting to engulf the region. And Israel, now it conquers Mount Hermon. It's reportedly 20 kilometers from Damascus, though I can't verify anything about any troops on the ground. I'm just reading the social media and occasionally the mainstream media. But that's not going to sit well. That's not a stable environment. Netanyahu already said, this is ours. We're going to claim this. We're never giving this up. This is Israel's whole approach. Whatever we take is ours. And it's up to us to decide what we take more. This is the greater Israel approach. It's completely destabilizing. It's madness. It is a question what the next U.S. administration will do, but best bets is it will continue to support this. This has been the underlying continuity of U.S. policy for decades.
Which is, in my opinion, completely contrary to U.S. long-term interests, because
and law and everything else, by the way. But yes,
yes,
completely against U.S. interests. Netanyahu has been the most destructive U.S. president we ever had, because he's told every president what to do. Every president has completely supported Netanyahu's vision of remaking the Middle East until today. And by the way, with Israel's illegal grab and effective invasion of territory, I mean, not effective, invasion of Syria in the last few days, the U.S. statesman said, well, yes, so we regard this as an understandable provisional action of the United States, of Israel, and the United States supports this. Of course, the United States supports this. The United States supports whatever Israel does, however much chaos is created out of all of this.
And it was the cruelty and the violence that is inflicted on the people of the region. I mean, it seems to attract very little concern. I mean, again, I've noticed some of the commentary that's appearing in the media here in Britain, which I'm sure is very similar in the United States. It's almost incidental to the larger geopolitical game. You have a few people say that it's all going to turn out well. We're going to have a democratic Syria. I don't think anybody really believes that. But these are ancient countries. The people who live there are real people. They lived their lives, they formed their businesses, they brought up their families. All of that is going to be thrown into chaos. And, well, for what? Because you can't control an entire region in this kind of way. As I said, it is only going to bring disaster upon Israel ultimately. And
I think it's one of the things that you constantly note, and that I cannot understand honestly, although I should be able to. They don't count the dead at all in any of this, not one moment. Your reasoning, my reasoning in Ukraine has been the same, which is what can come out of this later on that could not be resolved now at the negotiating table. And of course, I said that from the first day of the special military operation, but actually well before that, said all you can get out of this is deaths. All you can get out of this is mass killing. And in fact, we know, we don't know the numbers, but maybe 600,000 Ukrainian dead, 700,000 Ukrainian dead, never mentioned by a US official, never mentioned by a British official. There's something so peculiar in the absolute capacity to mass murder people, and that this is taken straightforwardly. And I just say this because, of course, no one mentions what this has to do with the people of Syria at all, except that we see for one day the happy talk of those flags waving in Damascus, like we saw the flags waving in Baghdad, like we saw the flags waving in Mogadishu, like we saw the flags waving in Khartoum, blah, 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 blah. We know that this is the prelude to yet more bloodshed. Nobody in the United States government, certainly not in the Israeli government, certainly not in the British government. I regard those as the three worst, by the way, but there are others that might challenge them, but I regard those as the three worst. Nobody would even deign to mention the people involved in this.
Professor Sachs, I'm going to be one very last question, because I know you have to go, and that's about Europe, because of course Europe, we're very close to this. Our governments seem to be completely happy to go along with these processes. Europe used to be at least make them go through the motions of wanting to stabilize the situation in the Middle East. Of course, a lot of this is a legacy of our own prior involvement in this region, the empires that we created there. But what do you say to the governments of Europe? What policy should they be following now? Very briefly, I it's a huge question, but
yeah, but
whatever
let's say that no country has more messed up the world, and certainly the Middle East, than Britain. Britain already made the problems that we're facing in 1915. Basically, in 3 years, 1915 to 1917, Britain promised 3 times over all of this land. First to the French, second to the Arabs, third to the Jews. This is in the Balfour Declaration. So this is this is British imperial manipulations that now have a shadow and a legacy of more than 100 years of chaos. Britain will never get this right. The nostalgia for empire, the bravado, the arrogance, it's, by the way, remarkably undiminished. 80 years after the end of the empire, Keith Starmer, they all do. Boris Johnson, they all think they're Lord Palmerston. They're all going off to battle. So Britain, I give no hope for at all in this, because nostalgia seems to have the longest lifespan of all imperial nostalgia. The French, without a principle. Okay, the French are always a little bit second fiddle to the British, but they wanted their little imperial peace as well, and they got it in Lebanon. They have it in Syria, and what good has come out of any of this? Not at all. I have not understood for years continental Europe's European Union approach to any of this. Of course, there are glimmers where there's some insight. The Spanish government has been very good on Palestine. The Irish, absolutely wonderful. They have their own colonial experience. But in general, Europe lost any insight into its own security, into its own well-being, when it basically handed off everything to the CIA and to NATO. And that's where Europe stands right now. I was so sorry to see that on the first day of the new European Commission, where is the president of the European Council and the high representative for Europe? That is Antonio Costa and Kaja Kallas. The first day they had to fly to Kyiv to be with Zelensky. Oh my God. Even knowing that President Trump is coming in, Europe cannot even think politically to this moment. Europe cannot think in its own interest to this moment. I said to many of them, if you're going to do diplomacy on the first day, go to Moscow, talk to Russia, have a real diplomacy. They can't figure this out. And this is tragedy. And it's tragedy in Ukraine. It's tragedy in the Middle East. The United States stands behind both of those tragedies as the would-be hegemon. It's all pathetic. The wars continue to spread, and it's very dangerous.
Professor Sachs, I want to thank you for taking time off. I know you're under a very tight schedule, for coming to share these insights. A very bleak program, if I may say, but I think a realist. It's the reality. It is what we're going to see, and we've seen. You've explained to us a lot of why it happened. Just to say thank you.
Well, thanks to both of you.
We'll be talking about these things again, no doubt.
Great analysis every single day. So important. And let's get together soon.
Yeah, indeed.
Thank you. Thank you, Professor Sachs. Take care.